Well, looky there. Something new and improved and very interesting from Benchmade. We're going to talk about the 15031-1 folding hunter from Benchmade. Coming right up, guys. Stay with me. Hi gang, Rob here. It is the morning of April 2014, and yeah, we do have something new from Benchmade. Kind of interesting, I think. This one in for sharpening from, from my sharpening customer and YouTube viewer Jay. Not the first knife he sent me. Got good taste, I think. This one is the Benchmade 15031-1. It is the North Fork Hunter. It is part of the Hunt series from Benchmade. And the reason I think it's kind of interesting is because over the last few months, several of these sort of smallish folding hunting knives have come across my bench. Let's see. Can we think of some others? Well, first of all, there's this saga, the Knives of Alaska Featherlight Hunter. Definitely the same application as the North Fork, and a knife that I wasn't looking for but ended up owning, the Mini Bone Collector. Do we see some similarities perhaps? So, kind of without trying, I've ended up in a position to sort of compare and contrast some entries into this market. And guys, don't think of these just as small game knives. I've got a couple friends who hunt white-tailed deer in northern Indiana, and their really preferred style of blade for skinning, gutting, field dressing a deer is a small folding hunting knife. There are reasons for that, not the least of which is if you don't like to split a sternum and you like to get the entrails, the lungs, heart, etc. from the chest cavity of a deer, and you're working blind with your hands inside the cavity, holding stuff back with one hand and cutting with the other, that small blade that you can predict where the tip is sometimes performs for you a lot more safely than a large fixed blade might. So I like the small folding hunter for deer hunting. And of course today we're not going to talk about this knife. We really don't want to talk about that ever again, but I do have one more short video I got to share with you about it. And we're not going to talk specifically about this knife, the Bone Collector by Benchmade and Michael Waddell, this discontinued. We're going to talk about this one, the replacement essentially for the Bone Collector. And it does look quite familiar, doesn't it? Let's go over the specifications with you real quick. There are some changes, some of them rather significant, between this and the Bone Collector. We have a blade length of 2.97 inches, this time made of CPM S30V steel instead of D2. Got a handle length of 3.90 inches, and the handle is steel lined with contoured layered G10 handles, much like the Bone Collector was, with some important differences. Overall length is 6.87 inches. The thickness of the handle is 0.53 inches. Weight is 3.41 ounces, completely credible for a knife of this application and size. They run the hardness to typical Benchmade for S30V, RC 58 to 60. They're calling this a drop point. I'll buy that. It does have a bit of an unnecessary and unwanted recurve in my opinion, but it is there. It is flat ground from about 2/3 of the breadth of the blade down. Plenty of run of flat grind to get you a nice gradual angle and a pretty thin knife behind the edge, but still some flat if you're using a sharpening system that likes that flat. If you notice this G10, it's going to be kind of hard to pick up on camera, but if you see these sort of dark streaks of the black, those are actually raised contours, sort of ridges in the handle. Kind of hard to pick up on camera, but they're kind of nice. The thumb stud on this knife is a little different than standard fare for Benchmade. Kind of an hourglass shape instead of their normal straight barrel with terraces at the top. Locking system, as you can see, is the vaunted Axis lock system. Knife is fully stainless steel lined. Not all Axis locks have full liners. They all have stainless steel liners. The Griptilian series has partial liners, but anytime the liners are not nested, they're going to be full in a Benchmade. Interesting lanyard hole, I think. The G10 is relieved for the lanyard hole, and it's easy to access, goes through both sides. Pocket clip is left or right hand tip up only. Pretty standard for the Axis lock knives. They really don't like to put tip down clips on Axis lock knives just because they sort of impede your access to the lock bar button. Kind of look at the mechanics of this particular example. Action's nice and free. Did just come off the sharpening bench and the spa treatment, so it's set up just a little tight, but takes a little bit of help to drop freely. Nice and smooth though, really nice and smooth. Blade centering is near perfection. Just a very typical, well-executed Axis lock knife from Benchmade. With that freedom of action, I've got 0 side-to-side play, 0 up and down. What you expect, don't you? Price-wise, I don't know what the listed retail on Benchmade's website is for this knife, but they street for about 150 bucks. Actually, a little more than the Bone Collectors were. Maybe not when they were brand new, but I think that's kind of an interesting price point for this knife, to tell you the truth. I suppose you could make the case that the steel choice makes the knife a little more expensive, S30V versus the D2 and the Bone Collector. But for very similar knives, it is what it is, brand new knife. The Hunt series from Benchmade sort of encompasses 2 old product lines, the Bone Collector series of Benchmades that were sort of purpose-built hunting knives in various shapes and sizes for different uses, and the old Lone Wolf line of knives. The Hunt series does have some members of its team that are sort of carryovers from Lone Wolf. Those are lockback folding hunters. That's a pretty cool knife too, just a real graceful drop point with the lockback placed all the way at the butt. Again, the edgy and blind areas, you're not going to accidentally release it with the lock all the way in the back. Both the Axis lock Hunts and the lockback Hunts come in 2 handle materials, this layered contoured G10, and then Benchmade's Diamond Wood, which is a laminated, stabilized, weather-protected plywood, essentially. Beautifully contoured and finished, depends on whether you like to go old school or new school. Both handle materials should be equally great. Let's talk about some specific little nuances of this knife that make it kind of different from this knife. Some of those changes I think are good, and some of them not so good. Both of them use the same clip. It is the Parkerized split arrow clip, my favorite Benchmade clip, as most of you know. The handles are similar in shape, however, some changes. If you notice, the finger choil on the Bone Collector is sort of a more graceful curve, and it gives you a bigger variety of grips, and it lets you come very far forward on the knife. If you wanted to be in this grip, or if you were going to a precise skinning grip with your index finger clear out on the tip of the blade, I think it lets you get a little far forward without having to go forward of the choil with your middle finger. The North Fork stops you much shorter of the end of the handle. There are, however, if you're going to this grip, there's some indexing grooves. I will not call them jimping because, frankly, they're not deep enough or sharp enough to give you any real purchase. They just let you know where your finger is, I guess. And there is jimping back at the base of the spine, and in the liners it's completely worthless, but you don't really need it on this knife. So as far as the ergos of the handle, versus the old knife, I'm kind of going to have to give the edge to the bone collector. I think it's got more traction, and I like the way the choil is able to be used in a more forward fashion. I also kind of like the index finger grip better on the bone collector. Your finger lies in this belly a little better than it does on the spine of the North Fork, although the grooves are a nice addition. They let you know where you are. On the bone collector, you can kind of feel that you're getting too far forward because you start to feel this drop in that sort of modified sheep's foot blade. You know when you've reached that peak with no grooves. The one part of this knife that I really like better is the overall texture of the handle, both for pocketability, carryability. Not so much ultimate grip as a user, but if you remember my video on the bone collector, these ridges present quite a problem entering the pocket. In fact, I had to modify them to make the knife pocketable. No such issue on the North Fork. So many of you might actually prefer the North Fork handle to the bone collector handle. You know, it's actually back here in a standard saber grip. It might actually be a little better than the bone collector. This little bump and finger groove here do lock you in a little more securely. So overall, yeah, let's give the win to the new and improved North Fork as far as handle goes. Now we get to where the good stops, in my opinion. You know, many similarities, same mechanism, same size, same materials, little change in blade steel, but very similar knives. This is clearly the replacement for the bone collector. Two areas where I really don't like the blade style of the North Fork. One is in overall shape. Nothing wrong with a drop point for a hunting knife. However, the recurve is completely unnecessary. Makes it harder to sharpen. Doesn't really give you any advantage in processing an animal. Don't know why they did it. It just doesn't need to be there. They could have gone with maybe a little more beard of how much blade there is beyond that not very well executed sharpening notch. You can see this knife, my edge sort of rode up the plunge grind a little. Just didn't want to do away with any of Jay's recurve. I could have gotten the Dremel in there and made that look a little nicer, but just chose not to on this one. Just kind of left that point alone. Not super well executed, don't really need the recurve. And here's my big hit. This is a thumb stud knife. And again, we're working with a very short blade. Sometimes we're going to be processing large animals. Sometimes in an area where I can't see the knife. I don't need that thumb stud impeding the cuts I'm going to make at the base of the blade. I much prefer the thumb hole in this style of knife, especially if I'm going to use this knife and have gloves on. Just stick my big fat thumb of my glove in that hole and out she comes. Is that going to be as easy with the thumb stud? Hard to tell. Doesn't really matter, you know, you're not in a life or death speed situation, but I would just prefer in a short blade like this to maximize my cutting edge by having a deployment method that doesn't snag as I'm cutting with it. I love the sheep's foot blade. It really enables your hand to work well on the spine. Got adequate belly, not maybe quite as much belly as the North Fork, but it's still got plenty. It's a little less pointy than the North Fork is, which I think makes it a little bit better skinning knife. So profile and shape of the blade, I think the better knife was the Bone Collector. Steel choice, yeah, you know, the knife's going to be wet its whole life. S30V definitely more corrosion resistant than D2. But the Bone Collector's gone. And so are the hideous logos. Really? Antlers and a skull alien face thing? Don't know. Interesting, I think that Benchmade borrowed some features from the Knives of Alaska Featherlight Hunter, the forward indexing grooves. However, they are much more grippy on the KOA blade. Although this is a Featherlight Hunter, and you know they went to great lengths to keep it light and thin. This handle, although I appreciate this length they give me, really doesn't fill the hand nearly as well as the North Fork does. The finish on this blade, by the way, is sort of Benchmade's standard heavy satin with a light stone wash, only on the bevel. The flats are plain satin, and then the bevel seems more stone washed. I've always liked that finish. This one has more of an aggressive satin than most Benchmades I've seen. Well, there you go, guys. No need to test this. We're all pretty familiar with the mechanism and the steel in the company, aren't we? We know how Benchmade's S30V performs. It performs admirably. We know about axis lock knives. One thing, you know, although I've never had this happen, I know it has. Be a good idea to make sure you keep some oil in the axis lock mechanism, especially if you're going to get the knife bloody. You know, the one Achilles heel of any axis lock knife are the tiny little omega springs that wrap around that lock bar. You can see them peeking out there. Rust will be your enemy on those. They are a stainless steel of some kind, but all stainless steel will rust. And you start to rust through that tiny little wire, it's going to break. So you do want to maintain your knives, guys. All in all, I think a very credible replacement for the Bone Collector. I kind of wish they would have just used this new handle with this old blade. They want to make it S30V, that'd be great. But you know, it's not a new blade style for Benchmade. It's not like Michael Waddell dreamed that up. Very similar to a thumbhole HG Griptilian blade or a triage blade. And I think it would work very well as a hunting blade, and it has. Let's get him out of the way for now. Let's take one last sort of long look at the North Fork up close. As with all Benchmades, or most Benchmades at least, just beautiful execution. Great level of fit and finish. Of course, you guys know that that edge is not factory Benchmade. Put that on this morning. Just wanted to shoot this video for you guys so I can put it in the box and send it back to Jay. So that's all for today, guys. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the Word is sharp.